I'm reading from a piece that I wrote last year, and just continuing to read. This is a chapter called Jack of All Trades, and last week I read about photography, and I'm going to move on today and talk about my short stint as a marine biologist. After 2 years at Southwestern College, I still needed 3 elective credit hours to graduate. My pre-med friend, Nick, had always been raving about his experience going with Dr. Hunter to Oregon to study marine biology. And when he learned that I needed to have summer school to graduate anyway, he started pushing me to sign up. I didn't need much of a push. I was just a little worried. I didn't know enough about biology. Nick, who looked up to me a bit, told me not to worry about not knowing enough and that I should just sign up for Dr. Hunter's course in intertidal life. It turned out that Nick was a little overconfident in me, not realizing that I was not familiar with kingdoms and phyla and species and such. My saving grace was a strong understanding of the scientific method. Before I left Arc City, I drove Ramapo, the cat who left Camp Ramapo with me, to Manhattan to stay with Eric and Sandra. She was pregnant and gave birth while I was away, so Eric and Sandra named the kittens, all after rock bands. They kept a big Tom they named Jefferson, gave Hendrix to Tyson, and Abba to me. It seems like there are more there, but those are the cats from that litter I've known. On the last night before I left, knowing I was moving out of town, Tyson and I pulled one last prank on the town. Unfortunately, I've been sworn to secrecy on that one. Talk to me later. But I was both exhausted and invigorated when Nick and I left the next day to drive his car from Kansas to Oregon. The trip was a good one in the sense that we really got along well and have common interests, give mutual respect, and are both full of interesting topics to carry on about. We were both also fine with camping rather than hotels. A little stress for me came out of the fact that Nick fell asleep very quickly when riding in a moving vehicle. I would look over and he'd be out. That was fine while I was driving, but when it was his turn to drive, he was awake and ready to chat and listen to the radio, which kept me up. When I did lose out to exhaustion, he drove us all the way through Utah and Idaho through the night, rather than camping as we had planned. We arrived a day early and went to Eugene, Oregon to track down some friends he had known the summer before. They threw a massive party with beer, mushrooms, and even a big bonfire in the backyard to kick off our summer right. Oregon Institute of Marine Biology, OIMB, is a satellite station of the University of Oregon, Eugene. Eugene is inland, so for marine biology courses that are more comprehensive, U of O students head out to OIMB, which is located right next to Coos Bay on the edge of Charleston, Oregon. The course I took was 2 months long and lasted a whole workday shift, 5 days a week. The first section of the course gave me some difficulty because I was unfamiliar with the nomenclature of life outlined by biological scientists. But then we got to collect animals from the intertidal, the space in the shoreline between high and low tide, bring them back to the classroom and set up experiments around them. As course requirements, in Dr. Hunter's class, we conducted 2 experiments with animals we'd collected from the intertidal. My first project had to do with brittle stars, which are tiny little starfish with long snake-like arms, and they're found in muddy sand. Not being sure at first what kind of experiment I wanted to run, I studied the specimens I'd collected under the microscope. Had I done more thorough research, I may well have known that placing these poor little animals in such direct, hot light would be damaging to their outer tissue. I started noticing a different kind of pulsating on some of the stars than on others. In hindsight, the ones with more exposure to my microscope light were more likely to pulsate. After the center disk pulsated this way for some time, the disk completely separated from the snake-like legs, which still connected to one another at the center. What I saw then was something like a chicken with its head cut off. With no center disk, the legs continued to behave much the same as they had when the body was attached. Still not understanding yet that I was responsible for the damage done to these animals, I set up an experiment to compare the reactions of those with and without bodies. Differences really did not emerge. The second project was a little bit more in-depth and drew on a research base, seeking to move it forward. This project focused on the selection of host animals by a particular kind of scale worm known to be found on leather stars, gumboot chitin, and keyhole limpets. Though the sample size was not large enough and the methodology not rigorous enough to publish, the study suggested that time was the crucial factor. Scale worms removed from a host, in general, returned to the host if given a choice between it and another host right away. But after some time without a host, chose instead the closest. 12 hours was enough time for them to give up on their previous host. Like folks in grad school and the military, these folks worked hard and played hard together. In order to offset the cost of the experience, I worked in the mess hall washing dishes, but this only rarely excluded me from fun with fellow students. The movie night at OIMB was not on a theme, but rather an eclectic mix of pretty good, very mainstream movies. For example, I'd never seen Rushmore, but it was fun to watch in that environment. One day we were getting ready for a night around the bonfire and I was a little excited. I got Nick's keys and started to go for beer, but backed into a fire hydrant, poking a hole in the rear bumper of Nick's car. I felt terrible and he felt as bad. It took a few days for that to smooth over, but we were okay again by the time we drove back to Kansas together. He still invited me to his wedding the following summer. A very female-dominated environment, besides Nick and me, I remember only 3 other guys. Jason got a real job bussing tables at the Pier restaurant, and I didn't see him much. Mostly I hung out with Nick and the other guys, Leave and Josh. Two strikingly pretty girls, Mary, who was from Southwestern, and Susie, who was from Eugene. 2 of the 4 guys being vegans who had actively participated in tree sits. We spent a lot of our free time outdoors. We took camping trips, went rope climbing, walked on trails, and partied around bonfires together. I remember thinking how strange it was one night that we were all sitting around the bonfire and off to the side had a second fire going, boiling some crab and some seawater. What seemed strange to me about that was that we had just been studying these animals. One of the students in our class had the same kind of crab in a sea table and was conducting experiments related to its perceptive ability, and here we were about to eat its cousin. There's a callousness that builds up, though. I remember a time in the intertidal when Jules, Dr. Hunter's graduate teaching assistant, wanted to show the strands that barnacles use to attach to rocks, so he pulled one out of a colony and pointed out the strands to a couple of students who had looked puzzled when he had talked about the strands earlier in lecture. One girl asked if he could just reattach now, and Jules said, "No, now he's dead," and tossed it callously over his shoulder. I should make it clear that I learned a great deal from Jules. He is a good man and a good biologist. All the same, this combined with the tendency of most students to return animals to environments that would immediately kill them, and the widespread practice of killing sand dollars and bleaching their remains struck me with the impression that biologists who study life seemed to demonstrate strangely little respect for it at times. When I was not hanging out with the others or washing dishes, I could be found out in the woods. I had a tent with me and eventually opted for the privacy of my tent in the woods over the comfort of the bed in the open dorms. The bathroom and showers were communal, and I never gave up my dresser and desk, but when I wanted to go to bed, I would trek out to my tent. I spent a lot of time in the woods by myself in the afternoons, too. Barefoot and blinded, I walked one trail over and over until sight was an unnecessary sense for me to negotiate the trail. I also took it upon myself to clear trails that had overgrown, simultaneously searching for the perfect walking stick. Often without shoes in this summer, my feet got very tough then. Another experience my classmates didn't share that summer was spending time with my Aunt Aggie and cousins Miranda and Casey. This was the first time I was around family who looked like me. Growing up as I have, it was a strange feeling to look around a car and see a bunch of others who looked similar to me. They took me to a drive-through safari in Wilson, Oregon. The drive was really nice. I have mixed feelings about zoos, but do find myself supporting them. I'm glad they visited me. I did not really remember them because they visited Kansas so infrequently, but that visit reconnected us as adults. Had they not, I'd have had 3 fewer stops on last summer's tour of America's couches. Next week, I'll read about being a psychologist.